And then
Recording in progress.
yes, this will get recorded, and it's about Mongolian also sentence structure and related issues. So please, Benjamin.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So, okay, slideshow from beginning. So today I'm going to talk about the Mongolian completive marker ch or chich in long form. I'm just talking about half Mongolian a little. I will be mentioning the origin, but not diving too much into dialects this time. Have to do away with the. In Mongolian, we have a so-called completive or intensive marker chich, which is found in about 12% of finite predicates in a 6-hour corpus of free conversation. It's also sometimes found in non-finite and even attributive predicates, but I'm not going to talk about this a lot today. It denotes attainment of actional boundaries, and it may disambiguate predicates in which such boundary attainment is optional. But more often, given this high frequency, it merely stresses that boundaries are attained, and along with giving stress or emphasis, it has already acquired a number of other functions, such as expressing lack of speaker control or quick, decisive action. That the concrete type of extended use depends on the choice of the aspective temporal suffix, I think. I have not gone through every suffixes in my all the suffixes in my corpus and my data yet, but I'll talk about a number. And the talk today is based on a corpus of 20 hours material, which contains, I think, 180,000 words, and among those 3,000 almost that contain the marker in question. Okay, so first let's quickly introduce the form. The marker has the form chich before 0 imperatives in formal speech and in orthography. It takes the form ts, like in ortson below, with the perfect participle, and everywhere else basically it takes the form ch, like orchla. That's another past tense form. The position within the verbal morphological structure is in front of the tense aspect markers, but behind the voice forms, like shown in the last example here. Okay, I will do a very quick literature review, since I felt so far there are two distinctive contributions to the discussion. First, there's Ottkonsurin. He analyzes the form chich in terms of completion, added force, and softened imperatives. And there has been quite a bit of other literature. I could also include Karin Ebert here, that basically shares the arguments of Ottkonsurin. And there has been my own analysis of a different dialect, where I came to very different conclusions, which I might not still hold, namely marking dissatisfaction, a forgiving stance, and incomplete execution. So precisely the opposite in the last case. So let's look at the literature, examples from the literature. Here we see a constructed example from Ottkonsurin, where you can say, I read the book, but I didn't finish it because it was not interesting. Here you could not use chich, while if you have the same sentence with chich, it implies that you read it through. And here I tried to confirm this with informants, which they did. But then you have another usage with added force, or marking a more speedy completion or something like that. And here, for instance, an example where somebody died, Otton Surin argues, obviously, Czech does not make a difference here. It's not whether you finished reading it, read it completely, or whether you did not read it completely. So completive as a meaning does not make a lot of sense here, but of course boundary attainment does, though it's only reinforced. And similar, the next two examples. C, for instance, expresses that maybe there are odds against which we shall now drink. Maybe we don't have time, but still let's drink. It does not mean that we should get completely drunk or something like this. So, and yes, for imperatives, he basically just said that they are softened and like an order or a reprimand gets turned into supportive counsel. Well, and just giving one short example, which is not very useful here, the number 3. Okay, then I wrote about the Horchen dialect, and this is now based on interviews where I basically categorized the answers of informants into 3 categories. One, for examples like 4, it is like the speaker is dissatisfied with what the others, with what the subject is doing, with the event. So here in this example, somebody just wastes water, and tefchikne is then used by the speaker to criticize this, possibly. So also in 5, somebody came too late, and it was inadvertently her children caused problems there, and informants judged that the presence of ch here makes a difference in regard that the speaker showing a more forgiving stance. And in the last example, somebody got used to something unpleasant, and speakers had the impression that either got used to it against odds or got used to it maybe incompletely. So Czech relativizes the completion in this type of examples. And I, at that point, concluded that dissatisfaction is an okay meaning to unite those 3. Though currently, rather than dissatisfaction itself, lack of control by the speaker, which I will propose for Khalkha, might also cover these examples. Okay, regarding, given that this marker has also a specific origin, from an auxiliary verb, to abandon, to throw away, to leave behind, we can also compare it to Turkic examples discussed in a paper by Johansson and Chato, where we have something like idu ber for the sudden beginning of an action, but perhaps more closely in Oghuz languages for a sudden, swift, spontaneous, effortless, casual, and often unintentional action. We will also get this effortless, casual for the Khalkh data to some extent, but in different contexts. Okay, so now I will go through the actional properties that I saw, that I could have so far identified with Czech. And here it's mostly occurs before perfective suffixes, and then is actually neutral. It's with converbal form that I looked at. It makes sure that the two actions are non-overlapping. Then it interacts with initial transformative verbs, with verbs with a lexicalized initial border in a certain way, and manages the past tense markers in Khalkha-Mongolian have future and past reference usually, if used in non-aspectual constructions, if used just on their own. And the presence of Czech also makes sure that it is past, for instance. Okay, here we see the data of my corpus, and you see in the left sphere we have different. In the upper corner, in the upper left corner, we have the past tense forms, the 4 past tense forms of Khalkha-Mongolian. And in the lower left corner, we have either like a converb val that is historically related to the model past and va, in v, or perfective converb forms, imperative forms. These I'm calling perfective or perfective leaning or perfectivized forms, and these make up 85% of all instances with which Czech occurs. While with imperfective forms like habitual or potential or the like, it's relatively infrequent, about 100 tokens. And yes, even with some imperfective forms like the progressive, it actually yields resultative meaning. So these, while here added to the imperfective sphere, are actually driven into the perfective sphere by the presence of Czech. Okay, so in the first example here, we see 2 actions. First, the speaker names the action, and then he says something about the action in a sequence of events. The context in which the second one in the sequence of events here gets son. And while the presence of se relates to how the speaker evaluates the actions, one could leave it out here, or one could insert it in the first. That would both be okay for native speakers. Okay, here, as I said, with converbs and art, informants emphasize that if Czech is used, it is very, very clear that the first event finishes before the second event even started. In this case, this example here, somebody walking, first eating and then going out somewhere, it's relatively expected that the events are distinct. But still, this was the emphasis on this distinctness was the only thing that I have worked out with informants for this type of example so far. Okay, we have different verbs, and here it has different effects. I will skip over most of and of course, in order to emphasize a boundary, the verbal predication has to have a boundary. So if we have a verb like to play around, like then there is no boundary and you cannot emphasize it. You cannot reinforce it. But if you have a predication with inherent boundaries, you can do this, and this is precisely most clearly notable if we have initial boundaries. So if you have a predication bemitten, it's basically only this. There are not so many verbs with stative meaning and initial boundaries like to know. So you could basically not replace this example in 9 with any other verb. So I know means a state, while if you add a ch, like in the next example, zugere za bizama mitchin, I will find out the way. 5 minutes I shall not manage. And in 11, it's not about being ill, which this verb could mean, but it's about getting sick. So the speaker might get sick when drinking the cold water. The subject might get sick when drinking the cold water, so the subject fears. This is also one of the very, very few attributive examples that I have in my data. Okay. If you have any aspectual forms, there will not be any future meaning. For instance, here in the first example, you see a past tense form, which also expresses that you have direct experience, direct access to it. And here it's about the speaker herself, so she has direct access to what will happen in 30 or 40 minutes. So she uses la for future in this case. If you add in the constructed example 12.2 should to it, then this meaning disappears, cannot occur. Same thing in examples like 13. Here you have a complex aspectual form, habitual past, combination with the copular verb. All examples in combination with the copular verb on the past tense form cannot lead to past tense, to future interpretations, similar to Czech. Okay. With the progressive, Czech is widely reported not to occur, but in Khalkha-Mongolian, as also already pointed out by Otton Surin, it does. And then you have examples like 14. Here, the dumplings are not emerging, but that they have already emerged. They have already been produced. 470, namely. So we have a resultative meaning here. So stance meanings would prototypically be a lack of speaker control and, but not always, events detrimental to the speaker. So here, the speaker is telling quite a long chain of events about the conditions in the summer camp worsening, and all these changes that worsen the situation of the living quarters all receive its so there's no, speakers are not forced to make any variation. They can use still for any form in a long chain of events. Similar here in this example 16, with somebody who has taken seat in the car of somebody else and is threatening this other person. Soch jara, has sitting down there, is used with it. So the speaker in this case is an observer, could not have influenced this, and it's detrimental to the speaker and to the associate of the speaker who was sitting in that car, before. Here, if the speaker acts against her will, it's not crucial that she could have directly done the action, okay, a bit differently. Shift can still be used. If the speaker has immediate control, but her efforts are in vain, some can also be used. And here, it's not detrimental to the speaker who had no control, but the speaker feels disgusted, also in a context in which shows up quite a lot. Okay, there are a number of events for which this analysis does not fit. So, for instance, 2b, it's just a quick successful completion in the original older sense, with emphasis on this quickness and completion. Even control could be present here. And it does not necessarily express surprise either. So what I think the analysis that I'm proposing here is covering easily over 50% of my examples, probably 80, 90, but not 100. So there are diverging uses. So with imperatives, very quickly, with imperatives, the speaker mainly expresses that he is not in control to order the other person. And with plain imperatives, this has the effect that Otkin-Surin describes, that they get more amicable. If you have employed an imperative like arch in example 19, then the idea is do it quickly. It shouldn't cause you too many efforts. And here, this effortless, quick conduction of the event actually makes it more polite, which is the first thing that speakers will notice, than pure arch. While with a polite, formal, invitational imperative, are, like in 20, it becomes more urgent. It becomes a stronger order and less polite in the eyes of the speaker. If it's used with volantatives, like in 21, volantatives can be used to suggest something and to announce a decision. With chich, they only announce a decision here in 20. Okay, and you see with the polite imperative, the presuming imperative and are, chich is very, very rarely ever used, while with the other forms it's quite frequent. I don't know how frequent it is with zero imperatives, because they are not very easy to search. I mean, with chich, I know how many I have, but I don't know the plain ones without chich. Okay, problems with quantification, I mentioned this, and here you just have a short overview again of the domains within which chich can be used. So even if something is inadvertent, even if it's something out of my control, if it's a noun adjective-based predication, chich will not be used. With habitual and progressive forms, it can be used, but not very frequently. But with the perfective and past forms, it's very frequent. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. We still have about 5 minutes for comments and questions. Is anybody making any questions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ben, for very interesting talk. And my question concerns the last part on imperatives. Yeah, there are not so many examples, so just not so obviously for me is it a weakening or strengthening the prohibition or imperative form. And I'm just thinking about Kalmyk differences in Kalmyk between Bertanya we and Bertanya I guess maybe the second, less frequent, of course, but maybe more strong form even. So my question is, do you think about the differences, not only between the different imperative forms, but also about the telic and atelic predicates in this construction, because it's also matters.
In the imperatives, I have not noticed. I mean, I did not select my imperatives forms for elicitation according to Aktionsart, but the responses of native speakers for the examples that I did discuss were very, very much in line with this. I have quite a number of these, because this is a part of the study that I have already completed. In contrast to for instance, I have very, very little data currently about converbal non-finite uses. I just looked at art, not at the others. But here, at the imperatives, I'm through with those.
Okay. Any other questions?
Elisabetta?
Yes. Benjamin, first of all, thank you very, very much for this very inspiring talk and with good examples. Great, as usual. And I'm very intrigued by the possibility to distinguish in a clear way, or at least in some ways, between intentional and non-intentional action. And you were saying something about this at the beginning when you started speaking about Czech. And I just grabbed a book, and there is one article, pretty old one from 1928, written by Yoshitake, who writes about the construction chi or ki, which explicitly marks the completion of an intended action. In a way, in nowadays in modern Khalkha-Mongolian, it's you have to use Czech, it's very used, in combination as well with all the possible sentence final particles, da and everything, isn't it? And in a way, it's a little bit part of it's a question. Is it, in your opinion, a part of the globalizing process everywhere in languages, where you have to, something is not good, it's always fantastic, great. You have to emphasize. So you put more Czech also for this kind of emphasis, and you need to combine it with several particles at the end of the sentence.
Okay, first, there are so many parameters with Czech that the particles with which it occurs, certainly it does, there doesn't seem to be any particular limitation, were not at all in the focus of my analysis. And okay, lack of control on the part of the speaker could, for instance, be signaled by da. So this might actually be worthwhile to look at. Obviously, Czech must have undergone a very, very, very big inflation, occurring with so many. I mean, I just said it was 12% of predicates or so, but if we just look at the past tense predicates, then it would be many more.
Yeah.
So maybe 30% or so, 40. So this would also be very interesting to look at if one had diachronic data from older, spoken, of course, spoken conversational data that is comparable to mine. I mean, if you now take official data, Czech will go down. If the speech is very official, Czech will go down. So you cannot just compare my data set to, like, say, 1950s news. It wouldn't help a lot. Or the political interviews, probably Czech would be lower even. Of course, you could also make a comparable set of formal data. If you want to compare particularly with an older language stage, you could take a set of modern data that would be comparable to that. Though I fear, let's say, the news style also in Soviet Russia was different than the news style from here. I'm just looking at that from a different point of view. So Yeah, both very interesting. I would like to read the article that you mentioned. Please send it to me.
Yeah, I have to. I read it once upon a time, and I have it as a reference in the book I just opened. And I will try to find it. And it's 1928, Benjamin. It could be good comparative data for you for sure.
Mhm.
And thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I'm just thinking of the rather recent origin of this phenomenon. It's a recent example of grammaticalization, but normally when grammaticalization happens, there is a need in the language to express something that you didn't express before. At the same time, we see that there are very many needs that this element now fills. So apparently there is variation both in dialects and probably even between speakers, and at least between different styles, more official and more colloquial style. So I'm just wondering how you classify this element now. Is it a derivational suffix or an aspect marker, or is it a grammatical element, totally grammatical, or is it still derivational?
No, it's.
What is the classification? Yeah.
I mean, the frequency and its tendency to mainly co-occur with particular tense aspect forms makes it, well, purely structurally, I would put it into the aspect system, even though it seems to slightly precede. I mean, it precedes us aspect constructions like art, bear, and so on. It's almost always in the first part of the predicate. I think I have seen a few examples where it comes later with an auxiliary verb, can happen. But no, it's clearly not derivational anymore. And as an auxiliary verb, it would probably not ever have been strictly derivational, but now it's really a flexional form at this frequency it has now.
Yeah. Okay.
In an orally construction, the point you mentioned first with the need to express a certain notion, control, and so on. I was talking a little bit about this because, of course, we have Mongolic languages like Mongol, in which control is marked much more strictly, namely in parts of participation, participation, non-participation. So if there was a felt need to express this, one would think that it could be connected with the influence of Tibetan. But, and I mean, this construction, it's common to all of Central Mongolic. Not to the branch languages, but it's common to Central Mongolic. It's also found in Shira-Yugur, for instance. So, but I didn't. It has cognates in Mongol, but I didn't look at those yet. So that would also be an interesting question for investigation. So there are so many different questions that I can put here before myself that I don't know which to address.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah. Well, I think we thank you once more, and then we conclude this. There is something on the chat, but we can now conclude this session with 4 very interesting papers. And now I suppose we have a pause for about 1.5 hours for lunch, and then there will be another session in the afternoon. So thank you